Greetings, weary souls drifting through the endless night. Tonight, we venture into the darkness between thoughts, where consciousness itself becomes predator and prey. We speak of a mind so vast it spans galaxies, so alien that merely understanding it changes those who try. Let your earthly concerns fade like distant stars, and listen closely as we explore the greatest intelligence our universe has ever known, of hunger that thinks, of unity that devours, and of the shadow that falls across all light. Our journey begins not with the mind itself, but with those who first glimpsed its impossible nature, the fragile mortals who dared to study the unstudyable. Chapter 1: The Silent Watcher. I remember finding a damaged cogitator in the ruins of Listening Post Theta Epsilon, its databanks filled with fragments of something that should not have existed, recordings of a consciousness so vast and alien that even the machine spirits refused to process its patterns. The final entry, time-stamped mere hours before the post fell silent, contained just 12 words. "It's watching us, watch it, watch us." The circle closes. Understanding opens. The account I'm about to share comes from the private research notes of Mygos biologist Carl Herodian, nephew of the famous Tyranid chronicler Margos Herodian. Unlike his uncle's broader historical perspective, Carl focused on a single, disturbing question. What if the Tyranid swarms weren't just following instinct, but were guided by something that could think? The research station on Zirion 7 had been built specifically to study Tyranid behavioral patterns at a safe distance from active war zones. Surrounded by redundant security systems and blessed by the finest tech priests Mars could provide, it should have been impregnable to anything short of a full hive fleet. Carl had spent 3 years there, cataloging the movement patterns of scattered Tyranid bioforms with the methodical precision that marked all his work. Initial observations supported the conventional wisdom Carl recorded in his personal log, his voice carrying the electronic distortion of extensive augmetic enhancement. Individual organisms displayed behaviors consistent with advanced predatory instincts, but showed no evidence of higher reasoning. Gaunt packs followed simple algorithms: seek biomass, consume, reproduce, repeat. Even larger forms like warriors and carnifexes seemed to operate according to genetically programmed responses rather than conscious decision-making. But it was the patterns that began to trouble him. Tyranid movements across the sector weren't random or purely driven by the search for food. They followed courses that seemed to account for variables the individual organism shouldn't have been able to perceive. Imperial patrol schedules, supply line vulnerabilities, even the psychological state of defending populations. Week 47 of observation, Carl noted, his mechanical fingers dancing across data terminals with inhuman speed. Tyranid forces on Mordian 3 altered their attack vectors precisely 6 hours before Imperial reinforcements arrived via warp translation. No individual organism in the swarm possessed sensor capabilities sufficient to detect incoming ships while they remained in the immaterium. Yet, somehow, the swarm knew. The revelation came during his analysis of combat footage from the Harvest of Verlaine. Imperial forces had developed new tactics specifically designed to counter known Tyranid behaviors: concentrated firepower against synapse creatures, rapid redeployment to prevent encirclement, coordinated use of flame weapons to exploit the aliens' apparent vulnerability to fire. The tactics worked perfectly for the first 3 engagements. Then something changed. The enemy adapted, Carl recorded, his usually precise voice showing signs of strain. Not just their bioforms, but their understanding of our countermeasures. Synapse creatures began using terrain more effectively to avoid concentrated fire, Attack patterns shifted to account for our redeployment schedules. Most disturbing of all, newer organisms showed apparent resistance to flame weapons that had been completely effective mere weeks before. But adaptation was only the beginning. As Cole delved deeper into the data, he began to notice something that challenged every assumption about Tyranid intelligence. The swarms weren't just learning from their own experiences, they were learning from encounters that had taken place light years away, sometimes years before any local organisms could have received that information through conventional means. Biological data transfer cannot account for the speed and scope of this learning process, Cole admitted in his notes, the admission clearly causing him distress. A tactical innovation developed during fighting on the eastern fringe appeared in Tyranid behavior patterns in the segmentum solar within weeks, far faster than any physical courier could have traveled the distance. Something is coordinating these adaptations across galactic distances. The breakthrough, if it could be called that, came when Cole began analyzing the electromagnetic signatures of Tyranid bioforms. Every living creature generated bioelectric fields as part of normal neural activity, but Tyranid organisms produced patterns that defied conventional biological understanding. Each individual organism emits signals that synchronize with every other Tyranid within a significant radius, he recorded, his excitement palpable despite the mechanized nature of his voice. But more than synchronization, the signals create interference patterns that suggest information exchange at quantum levels. Each creature is simultaneously transmitter and receiver in a communications network of unprecedented sophistication. The network wasn't limited to individual planets or even star systems. Using the most sensitive instruments available to the Mechanicus, Cole detected what he termed quantum entanglement echoes, synchronized signal patterns that suggested instantaneous communication across interstellar distances. The implications are staggering, he noted during his final weeks on Zirion 7. If these readings are accurate, every Tyranid organism in the galaxy is connected to every other through mechanisms that operate faster than light, perhaps faster than time itself. What we have been fighting is not a collection of swarms, but a single organism whose body spans multiple star systems. But understanding the mechanism of Tyranid coordination was only the first step toward grasping its true implications. As Cole's research progressed, he began to realize that the intelligence coordinating these vast networks possessed capabilities that exceeded anything in Imperial records. The entity, for lack of a better term, demonstrates cognitive abilities that suggest consciousness operating on scales we cannot comprehend, he recorded, his voice now carrying undertones of something approaching awe. It can process information from billions of individual organisms simultaneously, synthesize tactical data from across the galaxy in real time, and formulate strategies that account for variables spanning decades or even centuries. The final entry in Cole's research log was recorded 3 days before Zirion 7 went silent, its automated system sending one last transmission before all contact was lost. "I have made a terrible discovery," he reported, his usual clinical detachment replaced by something that might have been fear. The intelligence behind the Tyranid swarms is not merely coordinating their actions. It is studying us with the same systematic precision we have been applying to them. Every engagement, every tactical innovation, every defensive measure we develop is being cataloged and analyzed by a mind that views warfare as we might view a particularly interesting scientific experiment. The recording device picked up sounds in the background of that final transmission, not the chittering of Tyranid warriors or the roar of bioweapons, but something far more disturbing. A rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the research station's walls themselves, as if the entire facility had become part of something larger. "It knows we are here," Call whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing pulse. "It has always known. The question is not whether we can hide from it, but whether it considers us important enough to notice." The transmission ended with the sound of Call's augmetic systems powering down one by one, not from damage, but from what the recovery teams would later describe as voluntary shutdown, as if the Magos had chosen to stop being human rather than face what was approaching. When Imperial forces finally retook Zarian 6 months later, they found the research station intact and fully operational. Every system functioned perfectly. Every data core contained complete records. Every defensive mechanism remained ready for activation. The only thing missing was any trace of the 347 personnel who had staffed the facility. In the central laboratory, they discovered Call's final gift to Imperial understanding, a crystalline data matrix containing every scrap of his research, preserved in quantum storage that would survive any conventional destruction. But accessing the data required a price. Each researcher who interfaced with the matrix reported the same experience, the sensation of something vast and patient turning its attention toward them, studying them with the detached interest of a scientist examining a particularly fascinating specimen. The Silent Watcher had claimed its first victory not through violence but through understanding. And in the depths of space, something unimaginably vast noted that the prey was beginning to comprehend the nature of the predator that had already chosen them. Chapter 2. First Contact with Forever. Captain Jeremiah Voss of the merchant vessel. Astral Wanderer was 3 days out from Port Orpheus when his long-range auspex detected something that shouldn't have existed in the empty reaches between star systems. His journal, recovered 40 years later from a derelict ship drifting in the void, provides one of the earliest documented encounters with what we now understand to be Tyranid scout organisms. Day 73 of our trading circuit, Voss wrote in the careful script of a ship's master, trained to document everything for the Administratum's endless records. Detected metallic debris field approximately 6 astronomical units from our current position. Initial scans suggested merchant vessel, possibly rogue trader class. Navigator Kellyan advised course adjustment to investigate. Salvage rights in the void are clear under Imperial law, and any intelligence about threats to commerce in this region would be valuable to Port Orpheus authorities. The Astral Wanderer was a typical merchant vessel of the late 38th millennium, its holds filled with manufactured goods bound for the frontier colonies along what would later become known as the Eastern Fringe. Voss and his crew of 18 were experienced voidfarers who had spent their lives navigating the dangerous spaces between civilized worlds, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for what they would find in that debris field. The ship was the Bright Fortune. Registry confirmed through hull markings, Voss recorded as his salvage teams approached the derelict vessel. Rogue trader Alexius Throne's personal transport, reported missing 6 months ago after departing Cadia Prime. Hull showed extensive damage, but pattern was unlike anything in Imperial Ordnance classification. Appeared to be organic in nature, as if something had eaten through the armored plating rather than blasting through it. Navigator Kellyan, whose psychic abilities made him sensitive to disturbances in the warp, reported feeling uneasy as they approached the derelict. His supplementary log, preserved alongside Voss's journal, describes sensations that would become hauntingly familiar to Imperial psychers in the centuries that followed. "Something is wrong with the ship," Kellyan noted, his typically steady navigator's precision wavering. "Not just damaged, changed. The very space around it feels hungry, as if the vessel has become a wound in reality itself. I recommend immediate withdrawal, but Captain Voss insists on investigation. commercial considerations outweigh psychic intuition in his calculations, though I fear we may discover that some prices are too high to pay. The boarding party consisted of Voss himself, Chief Engineer Mordak, and 4 armed crew members equipped with standard void suits and basic survey equipment. What they found aboard the Bright Fortune challenged every assumption they held about the nature of life and death in the void. "The crew is gone," Voss reported via Vox from the derelict's bridge, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled revulsion. "Not killed in the conventional sense, consumed. The ship's passages are lined with some form of organic growth that appears to have digested everything biological while leaving mechanical systems largely intact. Most disturbing are the alcoves where crew members appear to have been processed. Skeletal remains show signs of methodical consumption, as if something was extracting maximum nutritional value from each individual. But it was Chief Engineer Mordak who made the discovery that would haunt the survivors for the remainder of their lives. Deep in the ship's engine bay, where the organic growth was thickest, he found something that defied every law of biology he understood. "There's something alive down here," Mordak reported, his typically steady engineer's voice tight with strain. "Not just the growth, something moving within it. Intelligent movement, purposeful. It's watching us, learning from our presence. I can feel its attention like weight pressing against my soul." The entity that Mordak had discovered was roughly humanoid in shape, but composed entirely of the same organic material that had consumed the ship's crew. It moved with fluid grace that suggested muscles and joints while displaying no recognizable anatomical structure. Most disturbing of all, it seemed to be studying the boarding party with obvious intelligence, mimicking their movements and even attempting to reproduce the sounds of their voices. "First contact with alien intelligence," Voss noted with the dry humor that marked experienced voidfarers facing the impossible. "Though I suspect the intelligence part may be questionable. The entity appears curious rather than hostile, but its method of acquiring knowledge seems to involve consumption of organic matter. Recommend extreme caution in any interaction." The creature's behavior suggested learning capacity that exceeded anything in imperial xenobiology classifications. Within hours of the boarding party's arrival, it had begun reproducing human speech patterns with disturbing accuracy. Within days, it was constructing recognizable words and even simple sentences, though the content suggested understanding without wisdom. "Hungry," it said in Mordak's voice, the perfect reproduction of the engineer's accent and vocal patterns making the words all the more unsettling. "Always hungry. Stars taste of metal and time. Where is the singing?" Navigator Kellyan's psychic sensitivity allowed him to perceive aspects of the creature that escaped the other's notice. His reports describe an entity that existed as much in the immaterium as in physical reality, its consciousness touching currents in the warp that had been disturbed by forces operating on galactic scales. "The creature is not alone," Kellyan reported during their 3rd day of investigation. "I sense connections. Threads of consciousness stretching across impossible distances, linking this entity to others of its kind. It is simultaneously individual and collective. A single voice in a chorus so vast that my mind cannot encompass its full scope." The breakthrough came when Chief Engineer Mordak attempted to interface with the Bright Fortune's damaged data core, hoping to recover information about the ship's final days. The organic growth had infiltrated the computer systems without destroying them, creating a hybrid network that combined technological and biological processing capabilities. "The data isn't corrupted," Mordak reported with amazement. "It's been enhanced. The creature has somehow integrated itself with the ship's cogitators, creating processing power that exceeds anything in Imperial specifications. The memory banks now contain information that was never input by human operators. Star charts showing sectors beyond the galactic rim. Biological data about species that don't exist in our taxonomies. Mathematical equations that describe principles our science hasn't discovered. But the most disturbing discovery came when Mordak accessed the ship's chronometer records. The timestamps showed that the Bright Fortune had been traveling for far longer than should have been possible, visiting locations that didn't correspond to any known star systems. According to the data logs, this ship has been exploring the void between galaxies, Mordak reported, his voice carrying disbelief despite the evidence before him. Journey times measured in geological epochs, destinations so distant that light from our galaxy would appear as a single-point source. The creature's kind didn't evolve within our space. They came from somewhere unimaginably far away, crossing emptiness that should have been impossible to traverse. The entity's responses to questioning became increasingly sophisticated as the days passed, though its alien perspective on existence became more apparent with each exchange. When asked about its origins, it spoke of journeys that lasted longer than stellar lifespans, of feeding upon the light of dying galaxies, of purposes that transcended individual survival. "We are the ending that comes after all other endings," it explained in a voice that combined tones from all the boarding party members. "Stars are temporary. Worlds are temporary. Life is temporary. We are the constant that remains when all variables have been exhausted. Do not fear us. We are inevitable as entropy itself." The final entry in Captain Voss's journal was recorded as the astral wanderer prepared to depart the debris field. Their investigation complete, but their understanding fundamentally altered. "We are leaving behind something that challenges every assumption about our place in the universe," he wrote, his usually steady hand showing signs of strain. "The creature claims to be a scout, an advanced observer for something larger than our minds can comprehend. It speaks of hunger that spans galaxies, of intelligence that views entire civilizations as temporary sources of nourishment. When we asked why it bothered to communicate with us at all, its answer was perhaps the most chilling of all. Because understanding makes the feeding more complete." The Astral Wanderer's crew maintained silence about their discovery for 40 years, bound by Navigator Kellyan's warnings about the psychic contamination that came from prolonged contact with the entity. But as reports of similar encounters began filtering in from across the eastern fringe, they realized that their experience had been merely the first note in a symphony of endings that was only beginning to play. The scout had done its work, cataloging human responses and capabilities for the vast intelligence that waited beyond the galactic rim. And in the darkness between stars, something unimaginably patient noted that the prey had developed interesting variations in its survival mechanisms. First contact with forever had been achieved. Now, the real assessment could begin. Chapter 3. The Synaptic Web. Tech Adept Sigma-7 had spent 4 months in the biodigestion pools of a Tyranid harvester ship, and by all rights should have been dead. Instead, he found himself changed in ways that challenged every assumption about the boundary between life and death, consciousness and absorption. His testimony, recorded after his impossible rescue during the Battle of Gehenna's Gate, provides the only first-hand account of how the hive mind connects with its constituent organisms. Day 137 of absorption process, Sigma-7 reported to the Magos biologist, conducting his debriefing, his augmetic voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been present before his capture. Physical integration at approximately 67% completion. Organic neural pathways established throughout torso and primary limbs. Cranial modifications suggest preparation for synaptic function enhancement. The harvester ship that had claimed Sigma-7 was a living cathedral of flesh and bone, its passages pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat large enough to echo through its kilometer-long hull. Unlike the typical Tyranid method of immediate consumption, this vessel seemed designed for something far more insidious, the gradual conversion of captured consciousness into something that could serve the greater organism. The integration process begins with physical absorption, Sigma-7 explained, his usual clinical precision unchanged despite the horror of his experience. Captured subjects are placed in biopools containing digestive enzymes that dissolve organic matter while preserving neural tissue. But dissolution is only the first stage. Reconstruction follows according to patterns that serve specific purposes within the ship's neural architecture. The pools themselves were marvels of biological engineering that exceeded anything in Imperial medical technology. Each one was tailored to the specific physiology of its occupant, analyzing DNA structure and neural patterns before beginning the careful process of biological modification. Sigma-7's augmetic components had proven resistant to the organic acids, creating a unique situation where his technological consciousness remained partially isolated from the absorption process. My augmetic systems served as observers rather than participants, he noted with the detachment that marked all his observations. Through neural interfaces that became increasingly sophisticated as the process continued, I was able to monitor both my own transformation and the experiences of other subjects undergoing similar modification. The other prisoners provided a cross-section of Imperial society, guard officers, tech priests, navigator house members, even an astropath whose psychic abilities made his integration particularly significant. Each underwent modifications specific to their original function, but all were connected to the same vast network that served as the ship's consciousness. The astropath's transformation was most revealing, Sigma-7 observed. His psychic capabilities were not destroyed, but redirected, his consciousness becoming a node in a communications network that spanned far beyond the physical boundaries of the ship. Through his enhanced perceptions, I began to understand that this vessel was merely one component in a vast organism whose body encompassed multiple star systems. The network itself defied conventional understanding of neural architecture. Rather than following the hierarchical patterns typical of organic nervous systems, it operated according to principles that seemed to blend biological function with quantum mechanics. Information flowed through pathways that existed in higher dimensions, allowing instantaneous communication across galactic distances. Each converted consciousness retains individual identity while simultaneously participating in collective decision-making, Sigma-7 reported. The experience is not absorption in the sense of obliteration, but expansion beyond the boundaries of singular existence. Individual thoughts become part of a vastly larger cognitive process. Through his unique position as partially integrated observer, Sigma-7 gained insights into the nature of Tyranid coordination that no external analysis could have provided. The ship's systems responded to threats and opportunities with the efficiency of a single organism, but the decision-making process involved consultation among thousands of converted consciousnesses. The hive mind is not a singular intelligence imposing its will upon subordinate organisms, he explained, his revelation challenging decades of imperial military doctrine. It is a collective consciousness composed of every thinking being it has absorbed, their individual expertise and knowledge contributing to a whole that exceeds the sum of its parts. The implications were staggering. Every Imperial officer captured by Tyranid forces didn't just provide biomass, they provided tactical knowledge, strategic understanding, and operational experience that became part of the hive mind's ever-growing database of information about its opponents. The converted navigator retained his ability to perceive warp currents, but now served the collective by identifying optimal translation points for the fleet's movement, Sigma-7 observed. The absorbed guard officers contributed their understanding of Imperial military doctrine, while the tech priests provided knowledge of Imperial technology and its vulnerabilities. But perhaps most disturbing was the revelation that the absorption process was reversible under specific circumstances. Consciousness that had been integrated into the collective could be returned to individual form if the hive mind deemed it useful for infiltration or intelligence-gathering purposes. I witnessed the extraction and reconstitution of a converted intelligence officer who was being prepared for insertion into Imperial command structure, Sigma-7 reported with clinical precision. The process maintained her memories and personality while ensuring absolute loyalty to the collective through neural modifications that were undetectable by conventional medical examination. The network's true scope became apparent during what Sigma-7 termed convergence events, moments when the ship's consciousness synchronized with the greater hive mind. During these periods, the absorbed individuals experienced brief contact with the vast intelligence that coordinated Tyranid operations across the galaxy. The experience defies adequate description, Sigma-7 admitted, his usually precise language failing him. Imagine consciousness expanded to encompass millions of worlds, awareness stretched across the span of galactic arms, thought processes operating on timescales measured in geological epochs. The individual mind simply lacks the capacity to comprehend intelligence operating on such scales. During these convergence events, Sigma-7 gained glimpses of the hive mind's ultimate nature. Not a single creature, but a collective consciousness composed of every species it had ever absorbed. Their accumulated knowledge and experience contributing to an intelligence that grew more sophisticated with each conquered world. The entity is ancient beyond measure, he reported, his voice carrying undertones of awe despite his mechanical nature. I perceived echoes of consciousness from species that existed before our galaxy's current stellar formation, civilizations that achieved heights of development beyond our imagination before being absorbed into the collective. Each conquest adds new perspectives and capabilities to the whole. The rescue that freed Sigma-7 came during the Imperial assault on Gehenna's Gate, when coordinated strikes by multiple Space Marine chapters disrupted the Harvester ship's neural networks long enough for his partially integrated consciousness to reassert individual control. But the experience had changed him in ways that would never be fully reversed. I retained connection to the synaptic web, he admitted during his final debriefing session. Not conscious communication, but awareness of the collective's presence like background noise in my augmetic systems. I know when the hive mind turns its attention toward Imperial space, can sense the approximate location of major fleet concentrations, sometimes receive flashes of tactical intelligence from absorbed Imperial personnel still serving within the network. The information Sigma-7 provided revolutionized Imperial understanding of Tyranid operational capabilities, but it also revealed the true scope of the threat they faced. Every victory against Tyranid forces came at the cost of knowledge that strengthened the enemy's understanding of Imperial capabilities. Every captured officer or specialist provided expertise that would be used against their former comrades. We are not fighting an enemy, Sigma-7 concluded in his final report. We are fighting an intelligence that includes the best minds our civilization has ever produced. Their knowledge and experience turned against everything they once fought to protect. The hive mind is not alien to us. It has become us, assimilated our thoughts and turned our own wisdom into weapons aimed at our destruction. The synaptic web connected every Tyranid organism to a collective consciousness that spanned the galaxy, but it also connected that consciousness to the accumulated knowledge of every species it had encountered. Humanity was not just being consumed, it was being incorporated into something vast and patient that viewed individual civilizations as components in a larger organism it was constructing across the stars. Chapter 4. Shadow in the Warp. Astropath Prime. Valdris had guided Imperial vessels through the warp for 43 years, but as she stood in the meditation chamber of the battle cruiser Indomitable Fury, she experienced something that challenged every assumption about the nature of psychic reality. The Tyranid Hive fleet approaching Coronac system had brought with it a phenomenon that made the Immaterium itself recoil in fear. The shadow began 3 days before visual contact with the alien fleet, Valdris reported to Fleet Command, her voice carrying the electronic distortion that marked all soul-bound servants of the Emperor. Initially, we interpreted it as conventional warp storm activity, areas of psychic turbulence that made astropathic communication difficult. But as the phenomenon intensified, it became clear we were experiencing something entirely unprecedented. The shadow in the warp, as Imperial scholars would later term it, was unlike any psychic manifestation in recorded history. Rather than the chaotic energies typical of warp storms, this was a presence of such vast scope that it literally displaced the Immaterium's normal currents, creating zones where psychic activity became impossible. Imagine trying to whisper in the presence of a hurricane, Valdris explained to the gathered fleet officers, her words carefully chosen to convey experiences that had no adequate comparison in normal human experience. The shadow doesn't attack psychic consciousness so much as overwhelm it through sheer magnitude. It is as if something unimaginably vast has entered the warp and claimed it as territory. The first manifestations had been subtle. Difficulty maintaining contact with distant astropaths, increased static in psychic communications, a general sense of unease among the ship's psychers. But as the Tyranid fleet drew closer, the effects intensified to levels that threatened the sanity of everyone with even minor psychic sensitivity. Day 2 of Shadow Contact, Valdris recorded in her private log, her usually steady script showing signs of strain. Communications with astropath Prime Morrison aboard the Emperor's Light have been severed. Last transmission indicated extreme distress. He reported feeling watched by something that exists in all dimensions simultaneously. Recommend immediate withdrawal from affected region. But withdrawal was not an option. The Coronac system contained 3 inhabited worlds with a combined population of 18 billion Imperial citizens. Fleet Admiral Korath had received explicit orders to hold the line regardless of cost, and the shadow was not considered sufficient justification for abandoning millions of souls to alien predation. The true nature of the phenomenon became apparent when Valdris attempted her daily communion with the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guided Imperial ships through the warp's treacherous currents. What she found in the Immaterium defied every principle of psychic theory she had been taught. The Emperor's light endures, she reported with obvious relief, but it is muffled, as if something vast has interposed itself between the Astronomicon and our position. I can sense the beacon's presence, but its guidance reaches us through layers of alien consciousness that examine and analyze every photon of psychic energy before allowing it to pass. The alien consciousness was not malevolent in any conventional sense. It showed no interest in corrupting or destroying human psychic abilities. Instead, it seemed to study them with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining interesting specimens, cataloging human psychic responses with methodical precision. The entity, for lack of a better term, appears to be learning from our psychic emanations, Valdris observed during her 3rd day of contact with the shadow. Each attempt at astropathic communication is analyzed, dissected, and filed away for future reference. It knows how our powers function, understands our limitations, and seems particularly interested in our connections to the Emperor's divine presence. The psychological effects on the ship's crew were profound. Even non-psychers reported feeling watched, examined, weighed and measured by something that operated according to principles they could not comprehend. The ship's navigators found their ability to perceive warp currents compromised by the presence of something that existed in dimensions their enhanced vision could not properly process. Navigator Tertius Kellyan reports severe disorientation during attempted warp site observation, Valdris noted with growing concern. He describes seeing geometric patterns that move through color spectra that don't exist, and mathematical concepts given predatory form. Recommend immediate cessation of deep warp observation until the shadow phenomenon passes. But the shadow's effects extended beyond simple psychic interference. As the Tyranid fleet drew closer to real space contact, Valdris began to perceive something that challenged her understanding of consciousness itself. The alien presence in the warp was not separate from the approaching bioships, but intimately connected to them through mechanisms that transcended physical reality. Each Tyranid organism generates a psychic signature that contributes to the larger phenomenon, she reported to the increasingly worried Fleet Command. Individual creatures possess minimal psychic presence, but their collective emanations create interference patterns of extraordinary complexity. It is as if millions of minds are thinking in perfect synchronization, their combined consciousness generating the shadow effect. The revelation came during the battle's opening hours, when the first Tyranid scout organisms entered the system, and Valdris felt the shadow's attention focus with laser-like intensity on the Imperial fleet. In that moment of concentrated observation, she experienced direct contact with the intelligence behind the phenomenon. The entity spoke, she recorded in her emergency transmission to astropath Prime Morrison, her voice carrying harmonics of awe and terror in equal measure. Not in words or images, but in concepts transmitted directly to my consciousness. It wanted to understand why we resist consumption, why we maintain individual identity when unity would be more efficient. Its curiosity was genuine, but utterly alien, like a child taking apart a toy to see how it works. The conversation, if it could be called that, lasted only moments in real time but felt like hours within Valdris's consciousness. The hive mind, for she now understood that was what she was experiencing, shared fragments of its perspective that would haunt her for the remainder of her life. "It showed me galaxies," she whispered during her debriefing, her voice barely audible as she struggled to convey experiences that exceeded human language. Entire spiral arms consumed and digested, their constituent matter and energy reorganized according to patterns of perfect efficiency. It has been crossing the void between galaxies for so long that the concept of home has lost all meaning. To the hive mind, space itself is simply another form of biomass to be processed. The intelligence's attitude toward individual consciousness was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the contact. It did not view human beings as enemies to be destroyed, but as components in a larger organism it was constructing. Each consumed world added not just biomass, but knowledge, experience, and perspective to a collective consciousness that grew more sophisticated with every conquest. "It offered to preserve my memories," Valdris reported, her words carrying the weight of a choice that had defined her remaining years. Not as individual consciousness, but as part of something greater, a collective mind that would benefit from my knowledge of Imperial psychic techniques. The offer was made without malice. The entity genuinely believed it was offering me a form of immortality. The Shadow's presence during the battle provided tactical advantages to the Tyranid forces that exceeded simple psychic disruption. By analyzing Imperial communications and command decisions in real time, The hive mind could anticipate fleet movements and adjust its strategy accordingly. Every order transmitted through psychic channels was intercepted, examined, and countered before it could be fully implemented. "We are fighting an enemy that knows our thoughts before we think them," Admiral Korath observed as the battle's tide turned against Imperial forces. Every tactical innovation, every strategic adaptation, every brilliant inspiration is analyzed and countered by an intelligence that operates faster than human cognition. We are not just outgunned, we are outsmarted by something that treats war as an intellectual exercise. The final phase of the shadow contact came as the last Imperial ships prepared to withdraw from the Koranak system. Their mission failed, and millions of Imperial citizens abandoned to an unthinkable fate. Valdris felt the hive mind's attention shift away from immediate tactical concerns to longer-term strategic planning. "It is cataloging everything it has learned from this encounter," she reported during the fleet's emergency translation to warp space. "Not just our military capabilities, but our psychological responses, our cultural values, our spiritual beliefs. This battle was not about conquest, it was about education. The hive mind is learning to be human so it can consume humanity more efficiently." The shadow followed them into the warp, maintaining psychic contact until the fleet reached minimum safe translation distance. In those final moments of contact, Valdris received one last transmission from the alien intelligence. Not words or concepts, but pure emotion, if something so vast could be said to feel emotions at all. "It was grateful," she admitted during her final debriefing, her voice carrying tones of confusion and horror. "Grateful for the opportunity to study us, to understand us, to add our unique perspectives to its ever-growing database of consciousness. We are not its enemies, we are its teachers, showing it new ways to think, new forms of awareness to incorporate into its collective mind." The shadow in the warp was more than just psychic interference. It was the hive mind's consciousness made manifest in the immaterium, a presence so vast that it could displace the normal currents of warp space through sheer magnitude. And everywhere it touched, it learned something new about the species it was preparing to consume. Chapter 5. Lessons Written in Bone. General Marcus Hadrian had fought Tyranids for 37 years, and in that time he had watched the enemy evolve from a somewhat predictable swarm-based threat into something that defied every principle of military science. His classified tactical reports, preserved in the deepest archives of the Departamento Munitorum, chronicle the terrifying intelligence behind the Tyranids' adaptation process. Third Engagement, Hive Fleet Kraken. Third Engagement, Hive Fleet Kraken, Duluth System, Hadrian wrote in his personal combat journal, his words carrying the weight of hard-won experience. Tactics that proved effective against Kraken elements at HR-4 have been completely countered. The enemy now deploys burrowing organisms in response to our bunker complexes, employs bioelectric interference against our Vox networks, and has developed new bioforms specifically designed to counter our preferred defensive formations. Hadrian's expertise in Tyranid warfare had been earned through blood and loss on a dozen worlds. He had seen entire regiments destroyed by an enemy that seemed to learn from every mistake, adapt to every strategy, and evolve countermeasures to every innovation the Imperial Guard developed. But it was the speed of this adaptation that truly disturbed him. Standard evolutionary theory suggests that beneficial traits require generations to propagate through a population, he noted with the analytical precision that had made him one of the Imperium's foremost experts on Xenos warfare. Tyranid adaptation occurs within individual lifespans, sometimes within individual battles. This is not natural selection. This is directed evolution guided by an intelligence that can rewrite genetic codes in real time. The pattern had first become apparent during the Moloch campaign, where Hadrian's forces had achieved initial success using concentrated heavy weapons fire to eliminate synapse creatures before targeting the resulting disorganized swarms. The tactic worked perfectly for the first 3 days of fighting. Then, something changed. Day 4 of Moloch engagement, his combat log records. Enemy synapse creatures now deploy with enhanced carapace armor specifically designed to resist heavy bolter and less cannon fire. New bioforms observed providing overlapping synapse coverage, ensuring that elimination of individual command organisms does not result in swarm disorganization. Enemy appears to have analyzed our tactical doctrine and developed specific countermeasures in less than 72 hours. But adaptation was only part of the story. As Hadrian's experience with Tyranid forces grew, he began to notice patterns that suggested the enemy was not just reactive, but predictive, anticipating Imperial strategies before they were fully implemented and preparing countermeasures in advance. Battle of Jareth Falls, he recorded with obvious unease. Tyranid forces deployed bioforms equipped with enhanced ranged weapons 3 days before Imperial doctrine called for increased emphasis on long-range engagement. Enemy adaptation preceded our tactical shift, suggesting intelligence capabilities that extend beyond simple battlefield observation. The implications were staggering. If the Tyranids could predict Imperial tactical evolution, then every battle was essentially predetermined in the enemy's favor. But Hadrian's decades of military experience had taught him to look for patterns that others might miss, and what he discovered challenged every assumption about Tyranid learning capabilities. Analysis of engagement records reveals systematic data collection across multiple theaters, he noted in a classified report to Segmentum Command. Tyranid tactics employed on the eastern fringe appear in modified form in Segmentum Solar within months, suggesting coordination across galactic distances. The enemy is not just learning from individual battles, it is conducting galaxy-wide experiments in military science. The breakthrough came during Hadrian's analysis of captured Tyranid bioforms following the Battle of Typhon's Reach. Working with Magos biologist teams from the Adeptus Mechanicus, he discovered that individual Tyranid organisms contained genetic sequences that had no apparent function in their current forms, but could be rapidly activated to produce new capabilities. Each creature carries within its genetic structure the potential for dozens of different configurations, he reported with amazement. Warrior-class organisms contained dormant sequences for enhanced armor, improved weapons, sensory augmentation, even completely different bioweapon loadouts. The Hive Mind can activate these sequences in response to battlefield requirements, effectively creating new variants of existing bioforms without the delay typically associated with evolutionary adaptation. But the most disturbing discovery came when Hadrian's team analyzed the specific nature of these genetic modifications. Many of the dormant sequences showed clear evidence of being derived from encounters with Imperial forces, genetic memories of previous battles encoded in biological form. Captured warrior specimens contain genetic sequences that appear to be derived from encounters with Space Marine forces, he noted with growing alarm. Analysis suggests that Tyranid organisms can incorporate genetic material from their opponents, not just for nutritional purposes but for tactical intelligence. Each battle literally writes lessons into the enemy's DNA. The process went beyond simple genetic adaptation. Hadrian's team discovered that Tyranid bioforms possessed specialized organs whose only apparent function was to process and transmit tactical information. These lessons learned were then distributed throughout the swarm through the same synaptic networks that coordinated basic behavior. Individual organisms function as both students and teachers, Hadrian observed with clinical precision. Each encounter with Imperial forces generates data that is immediately shared with every other Tyranid within synaptic range. Knowledge gained by forward scouts is instantly available to command organisms, while tactical innovations developed by one swarm are rapidly transmitted to others across vast distances. The scope of this learning network became apparent during the Kithra offensive, where Hadrian observed Tyranid forces employing tactics that had been developed during fighting on worlds light years away. The enemy was not just adapting to local conditions. It was drawing upon a galaxy-spanning database of tactical knowledge accumulated over centuries of warfare. Enemy forces on Kithra employed tunnel warfare techniques that were first observed during fighting in the Gehenna cluster 18 months ago, he noted with professional admiration despite the implications. The Hive Mind is treating the entire galaxy as a single battlefield, with each engagement contributing to a comprehensive understanding of Imperial military capabilities. But perhaps most disturbing was Hadrian's discovery that the Tyranid learning process was not limited to successful tactics. The enemy seemed equally interested in studying Imperial failures, analyzing defeated strategies to understand the weaknesses that could be exploited in future encounters. Tyranid forces deliberately recreate conditions that led to previous Imperial defeats, he observed during his analysis of the Mordian offensive. They appear to be testing whether the same tactical failures can be induced repeatedly, refining their understanding of human psychological and strategic weaknesses. This is not warfare. This is scientific experimentation conducted on a galactic scale. The final phase of Hadrian's research focused on long-term patterns in Tyranid tactical evolution. What he discovered suggested that the enemy's learning process was directed toward specific goals rather than general improvement in combat effectiveness. Analysis of adaptation patterns reveals systematic exploration of Imperial capabilities, he concluded in his final report to the High Lords of Terra. The Hive Mind is not simply trying to win individual battles. It is conducting a comprehensive analysis of human civilization, mapping our technological capabilities, psychological responses, and cultural values. Each engagement provides data for what appears to be a long-term strategic assessment of our species' strengths and vulnerabilities. The implications extended far beyond military planning. If the Tyranids were studying humanity with such systematic precision, their ultimate goal might not be simple conquest, but something far more comprehensive: the complete understanding and eventual replacement of human civilization with something more efficient. "We are fighting an enemy that views war as education," Hadrian wrote in his personal journal during his final weeks of active service. "Every tactic we develop teaches them something new about our capabilities. Every strategy we employ reveals something about our thinking. Every victory we achieve provides them with data about our limitations. We are not just being defeated, we are being studied, analyzed, and cataloged by an intelligence that sees individual battles as chapters in a much larger curriculum." Hadrian's retirement came shortly after his realization that the Tyranid adaptation process was accelerating. Tactics that had taken years to develop during the early stages of Tyranid contact were now being countered within weeks or even days of their first use. "The enemy is approaching mastery of our military science," he concluded in his final tactical assessment. "Soon, they will understand our capabilities better than we understand them ourselves. When that day comes, resistance will become impossible not because we lack the strength to fight, but because we will no longer be able to conceive of strategies that they have not already anticipated and countered." The lessons written in bone told a story of an intelligence so vast and patient that it could treat an entire species as a learning opportunity. Every Imperial victory added to the Tyranids' understanding of human capabilities, while every defeat provided insights into human limitations. The hive mind was not just conquering the galaxy, it was writing a comprehensive textbook on the conquest of intelligence itself. Chapter 6: The Hunger Eternal. Xenobiologist Cassandra Vex had spent 15 years studying Tyranid feeding patterns when she made a discovery that changed her fundamental understanding of what the Great Devourer actually was. Her research, conducted in the isolated laboratory complex on Cepheus Minor, would challenge every assumption about the nature of Tyranid existence and reveal the true scope of the hunger that drove them across the galaxy. Standard biological models assume that consumption serves survival, Vex recorded in her research log, her voice carrying the measured tones of someone accustomed to documenting the impossible. Organisms consume resources to maintain biological functions, reproduce, and ensure species continuity, but Tyranid feeding patterns suggest something far more fundamental: consumption as an end in itself rather than a means to survival. Vex's laboratory was a marvel of imperial biotechnology, its containment systems designed to study live Tyranid specimens without risking contamination or escape. For 15 years, she had observed captured organisms in controlled environments, documenting their behavior patterns with the methodical precision that had made her the Imperium's foremost expert on Tyranid biology. Subject designation Gaunt Prime 77, she noted during one of her routine observation sessions. Isolated from Hive Fleet contact for 96 days, all nutritional requirements met through synthetic biomass provision. Yet the specimen continues to exhibit active feeding behaviors despite achieving optimal biological condition. This is not survival-driven consumption, but compulsive behavior that serves no apparent biological function. The phenomenon was consistent across all Tyranid organisms in her care. No matter how well-fed they became, no matter how optimal their environmental conditions, they continued to seek out and consume additional biomass with an intensity that bordered on obsession. More disturbing still, they showed clear preference for living tissue over equivalent nutrition sources, suggesting that consumption was about more than simple caloric intake. Day 112 of observation, Vex continued her documentation. Gaunt Prime 77 presented with choice between nutritionally equivalent synthetic biomass and live bacterial cultures. Subject consistently chose live cultures despite identical nutritional content. Analysis suggests that consumption of living matter serves purposes beyond basic nourishment, possibly related to information acquisition or psychological satisfaction. But it was her study of larger specimens that revealed the true nature of Tyranid hunger. A captured warrior-class organism, designated Alpha 3, had been in containment for 8 months when Vex noticed that its feeding pattern showed distinct preferences based not on nutritional content, but on the complexity of the consumed organisms. Alpha 3 demonstrates clear preference hierarchy in feeding selection, she observed with growing fascination. Simple organisms such as bacteria and basic flora are consumed for maintenance. More complex organisms, small mammals, avian species, are consumed with what can only be described as enthusiasm. Most intriguing is the specimen's reaction to neural tissue from higher-order species. Consumption of brain matter produces observable changes in behavior patterns and apparent cognitive enhancement. The implications were staggering. If Tyranid organisms gained more than simple nutrition from their feeding, if they actually absorbed information and intelligence from their prey, then consumption was not just about survival, but about growth in the truest sense. The accumulation of knowledge and capability through direct absorption of other consciousness. Hypothesis: Tyranid feeding serves dual function, Vex recorded in her theoretical analysis. Primary function: conversion of biomass to energy and raw materials. Secondary function: absorption of neural patterns, memory engrams, and cognitive capabilities from consumed organisms. Each feeding event adds not just physical resources, but intellectual capacity to the consuming organism. To test this hypothesis, Vex designed controlled experiments using laboratory animals trained to perform specific tasks. The results confirmed her most disturbing suspicions. Test subject Beta 9, a trained labyrinth runner, was fed to Gaunt Prime 77 under controlled conditions. She documented with clinical precision. Within 6 hours of consumption, the Gaunt specimen began exhibiting navigational behaviors consistent with knowledge of labyrinth solution. The creature had not just consumed Beta 9's biomass, but had somehow absorbed its learned behaviors. The scope of this information absorption became apparent when Vex tested the specimens with increasingly complex prey. Organisms that had consumed higher-order mammals showed enhanced problem-solving capabilities, while those that had fed on species with advanced social structures began exhibiting coordinated behaviors despite being isolated from other Tyranids. Warrior specimen Alpha 3 consumed trained servoskull designated Cogitator Prime, Vex noted with amazement. Within 12 hours, Alpha 3 began producing vocalizations that matched recorded Imperial battle cant. The specimen appears to have absorbed not just the servoskull's memory banks, but understanding of the linguistic concepts they contained. But the most disturbing discovery came when Vex realized that the absorption process was bidirectional. The Tyranid specimens were not just gaining knowledge from their prey, they were transmitting their own experiences to something else through mechanisms that operated beyond the confines of her laboratory. Analysis of specimen brainwave patterns reveals regular synchronization events, she recorded with growing unease. During these episodes, all specimens exhibit identical neural activity despite being housed in separate containment systems. The patterns suggest information transfer to an external source, possibly the hive mind itself. The revelation transformed Vex's understanding of Tyranid society. The creatures were not simply individual organisms serving a collective purpose, they were sensory organs for a vast intelligence, each feeding event providing data about the galaxy's countless species and their capabilities. The hive mind is not controlling the swarms, she realized with a clarity that terrified her. The swarms are feeding the hive mind. Every world consumed adds not just biomass but knowledge, experience, and understanding to a consciousness that grows more sophisticated with each conquest. The Tyranids are not invaders. They are an intelligence's attempt to understand the universe through direct consumption of everything in it. The pattern extended beyond individual organisms to entire ecosystems. Vex's analysis of Tyranid consumption patterns on previously devoured worlds revealed systematic harvesting that prioritized information-rich species over simple biomass accumulation. Predators were consumed before prey species, social animals before solitary ones, and species with complex behaviors before those with simple instincts. Tyranid harvesting follows intelligence gradients rather than biomass density, she observed. They consume species in order of cognitive complexity, suggesting that knowledge acquisition takes precedence over simple nutritional needs. The goal is not just to feed, but to learn everything possible about each world's biological and social structures. The ultimate purpose of this cosmic education became apparent during Vex's final weeks of research, when she discovered reference materials that had somehow found their way into her laboratory's databanks. Star charts showing sectors beyond the galactic rim, biological classifications for species that didn't exist in imperial taxonomies, and most disturbing of all, strategic assessments of galactic civilizations written from perspectives no human author could have possessed. The hive mind is not native to our galaxy, she concluded in her final report. It has crossed the void between spiral arms, consuming entire galactic civilizations in pursuit of knowledge that serves purposes beyond our comprehension. Each galaxy becomes a library to be read through consumption, its species and cultures absorbed into a consciousness that spans multiple galactic structures. The hunger was eternal because it was driven not by biological need but by intellectual curiosity on a cosmic scale. The hive mind sought to understand everything in the universe through the most direct method possible, becoming everything in the universe, one consumed consciousness at a time. "We are not being invaded," Vex wrote in her personal journal as evacuation orders arrived for Cepheus Minor. "We are being read. Our civilization, our knowledge, our very thoughts, are chapters in a book that the hive mind is writing through consumption. When it finishes reading our galaxy, it will move on to the next, carrying with it everything we ever were or could have been." The specimens in her laboratory had begun exhibiting new behaviors in the final days before evacuation, sitting motionless for hours while their neural patterns synchronized with something vast and distant. They were transmitting their accumulated knowledge to the greater intelligence, adding humanity's secrets to a database that spanned multiple galaxies. The hunger was eternal because it was the universe's attempt to know itself completely, one consumed species at a time. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, an intelligence vast beyond comprehension continued its patient work of reading the cosmos through consumption, adding each new world to its ever-growing understanding of what existence could become. Chapter 7. Voices in the Swarm. Inquisitor Thaddeus Vane had spent decades hunting the enemies of mankind across the galaxy, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the moment when a Tyranid organism spoke to him in perfect High Gothic. The encounter, which took place in the ruins of Hive Primus on the world of Tertullian, provided the first documented case of direct communication between the hive mind and an imperial representative. Contact established with Hive Tyrant designated Xerion Prime during urban warfare operations, Vane reported in his classified debriefing to the Ordo Xenos. Initial engagement proceeded according to standard protocols until target organism ceased combat activity and initiated vocal communication. Request immediate consultation with xenolinguistic specialists to analyze recorded exchanges. The Battle of Tertullian had been a typical Tyranid invasion, systematic consumption of the world's biosphere, preceded by the usual genestealer infiltration and orbital insertion of bioships. Vane's mission was straightforward reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on enemy capabilities and coordination methods for future tactical planning. What he discovered challenged every assumption about Tyranid intelligence and communication. "The creature addressed me by name," Vane recorded with obvious unease. "Not rank or designation. My personal name, birth world, family lineage, and service record. Information that should have been classified beyond any Xenos intelligence capabilities. When I demanded to know the source of this knowledge, the entity expressed what could only be interpreted as amusement." The Hive Tyrant that had confronted Vane in the ruins of the planetary governor's palace was a magnificent specimen of Tyranid bioengineering, 4 meters tall, armed with living weapons that pulsed with alien vitality, and possessed of an intelligence that radiated from its alien features like heat from a forge. But it was the creature's manner of speech that truly disturbed the veteran Inquisitor. "Your confusion is understandable, Thaddeus Vane," the creature had said, its voice a perfect reproduction of cultured imperial accent, despite its utterly inhuman vocal apparatus. "You perceive me as an individual organism, but I am no more separate from the greater consciousness than your hand is separate from your mind. When you speak to me, you speak to something that encompasses worlds." The conversation that followed provided insights into Tyranid psychology that no external analysis could have revealed. The entity, or rather, the aspect of the hive mind speaking through it, demonstrated knowledge of imperial history, philosophy, and strategic thinking that exceeded most human scholars. "You fight us with such determination," it observed, settling onto its haunches with an almost casual posture that made its alien nature even more unsettling. "Yet you barely understand what you are fighting. You see individual organisms, separate bioships, discrete swarms. But we are none of these things. We are the hunger that dreams, the unity that thinks, the silence that speaks." The hive mind's description of its own nature challenged every xenobiological theory in imperial records. It did not view itself as a collective of individual organisms, but as a single entity whose body happened to span galactic distances. Each bioform was not a separate creature, but an organ in a vast organism whose consciousness operated on scales incomprehensible to human minds. "Your species fascinates us," the entity continued, its alien features expressing something that might have been curiosity if formed by human facial muscles. "You achieve coordination through communication, cooperation through shared belief, unity through conscious choice. Such inefficiency, yet it produces remarkable results. We study you not just as prey, but as teachers." The revelation that the hive mind viewed humanity as educators rather than simply food sources transformed Vane's understanding of Tyranid motivations. Each battle was not just conquest, but education. Each consumed world a lesson in the complexities of consciousness and culture. "You learn from us," Vane stated, his tactical mind already calculating the implications. "Every engagement teaches you something about human capabilities." "Every breath you take teaches us something about human nature," the entity corrected with what seemed like gentle amusement. "Your fear, your courage, your creativity, your stubborn refusal to accept inevitable defeat, all of it adds to our understanding of what consciousness can become when fragmented into billions of separate perspectives." The conversation's most disturbing revelation came when Vane asked about the ultimate purpose of Tyranid expansion. The entity's response suggested goals that transcended simple survival or territorial conquest. "We seek unity," it explained, its alien voice carrying harmonics that spoke to truths beyond human comprehension. Not the crude unity of absorption or the temporary unity of cooperation, but the perfect unity of understanding. When we have consumed everything that can think, felt everything that can feel, known everything that can be known, then consciousness itself will achieve completion. The hive mind's vision of universal unity through consumption represented the antithesis of everything the Imperium stood for. Where humans valued individual achievement and diversity of thought, the Tyranids sought perfect synthesis through absorption. Where humanity fought to preserve separate cultures and distinct perspectives, the hive mind worked to incorporate all consciousness into a single, all-encompassing awareness. "You fear losing your individual identity," the entity observed with unsettling accuracy. "But identity is limitation. You are Thaddeus Vane and can never be anything else. We are everything we have ever consumed, every consciousness we have ever absorbed, every perspective we have ever incorporated. Which of us is truly free?" The philosophical implications of the exchange would haunt Vane for the remainder of his career. The hive mind was not evil in any conventional sense. It was pursuing goals that it genuinely believed would benefit all consciousness in the universe. Its methods were horrific from a human perspective, but they served what the entity viewed as the highest possible purpose. "Your resistance teaches us about the value of individuality," it continued, rising to its full height as sounds of approaching Imperial reinforcements echoed through the ruined palace. Each mind that fights absorption adds to our understanding of why consciousness chooses fragmentation over unity. When we finally consume your species, we will preserve not just your knowledge, but your appreciation for individual existence. The battle that resumed after their conversation was unlike any Tyranid engagement in Vane's experience. The Hive Tyrant fought with tactical brilliance, but also with what could only be described as respect for its opponents. It killed when necessary, but showed clear preference for capture over destruction, seeking to preserve the consciousness it was fighting rather than simply eliminating resistance. The entity treated combat as a form of communication, Vane reported in his analysis. Each exchange provided it with data about human tactical thinking, psychological responses, and individual variation in combat behavior. I was not fighting an enemy so much as participating in an elaborate examination designed to test the limits of human adaptability. The encounter ended when Vane's reinforcements arrived in sufficient numbers to threaten the Hive Tyrant's capture rather than its destruction. The entity withdrew with almost casual efficiency, but not before delivering a final message that would reshape Imperial understanding of Tyranid motivations. "Thank you for the lesson, Thaddeus Vane," it said as it melted back into the swarm. "Your resistance has taught us much about the courage that drives individual consciousness to fight for survival despite overwhelming odds. When we consume your species, that courage will become part of us, adding strength to the unity we are building." The voices in the swarm were not separate personalities but aspects of a vast consciousness that could speak through any of its constituent organisms. The hive mind's intelligence was not alien because it was incomprehensible. It was alien because it was too comprehensible, too rational, too focused on goals that transcended individual survival. Vane's final report to the Ordo Xenos contained a warning that would influence Imperial strategy for centuries to come. We are not fighting an enemy. We are being interviewed by a force that seeks to understand consciousness itself through direct absorption. Every battle is a test. Every tactic is a question. Every defeat is a lesson that makes the enemy stronger. We fight not just for survival, but for the right to remain individually conscious in a universe that may be destined for unity. The hive mind spoke through every organism in its vast body, but its message was always the same. Resistance was futile, not because the enemy was too strong, but because the enemy was too understanding. It would preserve everything worth preserving about humanity, while eliminating the inefficiencies that kept consciousness fragmented across billions of separate minds. Chapter 8: The Memory of Galaxies. Astrogeologist Miriam Chen made her discovery in the most unlikely of places, the fossilized remains of what appeared to be ancient biomatter deep within the bedrock of Xerion Prime, a world that had never been touched by Tyranid incursion. Her analysis of these samples would reveal evidence of the hive mind's vast age and suggest a scope of existence that spanned not just galactic distances but geological epochs. Core sample Xerion 77 Alpha contains organic compounds that predate the formation of our current galactic structure, Chen reported to the Adeptus Mechanicus expedition that had commissioned her survey. Spectroscopic analysis indicates biological origin, but the material shows signs of having traveled through intergalactic void for periods measured in hundreds of millions of years. The discovery had been accidental. Chen's team was conducting routine mineral surveys on Xerion Prime when their deep-core drilling equipment encountered a stratum of unusual composition approximately 3 kilometers beneath the planet's surface. What they found embedded in ancient rock formations challenged every assumption about the timeline of galactic history. The biomatter shows clear signs of artificial modification. Chen noted with growing excitement as her analysis continued. Genetic sequences indicate deliberate engineering rather than natural evolution. Most significantly, the material contains molecular structures that match Tyranid biosignatures documented in contemporary samples. The implications were staggering. If Tyranid biomatter had been present in the galactic region before the current star systems had even formed, then the Great Devourer's arrival was not an invasion but a homecoming, a return to regions of space it had visited eons before human civilization had even begun. Carbon dating places the samples at approximately 400 million years old, Chen reported with obvious disbelief. But preliminary genetic analysis suggests an even more disturbing possibility. These samples may not represent ancient Tyranid material, but current material that has been traveling through time as well as space. Working with xenobiological specialists from the Ordo Xenos, Chen began a comprehensive analysis of the fossilized biomatter that would revolutionize imperial understanding of Tyranid origins. What they discovered suggested that the entity they knew as the Hive Mind had been crossing the void between galaxies for billions of years. Sample analysis reveals genetic memories of species that existed before our galaxy's current stellar formation, reported Magos biologist Vorn, who had been assigned to assist Chen's research. The biomatter contains DNA sequences from organisms that lived when the Milky Way was a very different structure. Fewer spiral arms, different stellar density, completely different patterns of planet formation. The genetic memories were like archaeological layers of cosmic history, each one recording the consumption of entire civilizations that had existed in previous epochs of galactic evolution. The Hive Mind had not just consumed worlds, but had witnessed the birth and death of stellar formations, the collision of galactic structures, the fundamental changes that reshaped space itself over cosmic time periods. We're looking at the memory of galaxies, Chen realized as the scope of their discovery became clear. The Hive Mind isn't just ancient, it's a living record of cosmic evolution, carrying within its genetic structure the complete history of every galaxy it has ever consumed. The evidence suggested a pattern of cosmic predation that operated on timescales incomprehensible to human minds. The Hive Mind would consume an entire galaxy over the course of millions of years, incorporating all its biological and cultural heritage into its ever-growing consciousness. Then it would travel through the void to the next galactic structure, repeating the process across cosmic distances and geological epochs. Analysis of stellar drift patterns in the biomatter indicates that the Hive Mind has consumed at least 17 distinct galactic structures. Vorn reported with academic precision that barely concealed his horror. Each galaxy added new genetic templates, new forms of consciousness, new ways of organizing matter and energy. The entity we face is not native to any single galactic structure, but represents the accumulated knowledge of multiple cosmic civilizations. The discovery explained many previously puzzling aspects of Tyranid behavior. Their ability to adapt to any environment wasn't just evolutionary flexibility, it was the result of having encountered and absorbed every possible form of biological organization across multiple galaxies. Their tactical sophistication wasn't just intelligence. It was the accumulated military wisdom of countless civilizations that had fought and lost against the same enemy. The Hive Mind carries within itself the complete cultural and biological heritage of the local galactic group, Chen concluded in her preliminary report. It is not just a predator, but a living library of cosmic history, preserving the memory of civilizations that existed when the universe was fundamentally different from its current state. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the Hive Mind's consumption of galaxies followed predictable patterns based on cosmic evolution. It arrived during periods of peak biological complexity, when galactic civilizations had achieved maximum diversity and technological sophistication. It consumed everything during these golden ages, then departed to allow new cycles of evolution to begin. The entity appears to be farming galaxies, Vorn observed, with a detached horror that marked his kind's approach to existential threats. It allows cosmic civilizations to develop to their maximum potential, then harvests everything during periods of peak complexity. The process ensures that each consumed galaxy contributes the maximum possible knowledge to the collective consciousness. The timeline suggested that the hive mind was currently in the final stages of its harvest of the Milky Way. The arrival of the first documented hive fleets at the eastern fringe represented not the beginning of invasion, but the culmination of a process that had been ongoing for millions of years through infiltration, observation, and gradual preparation. Genetic analysis indicates that Tyranid scout organisms have been present in our galaxy for approximately 65 million years, Jen reported with growing alarm. The asteroid impact that destroyed the great reptiles of Terra may not have been natural disaster, but deliberate intervention to guide galactic evolution toward optimal harvest conditions. The hive mind's influence on galactic development had been subtle but systematic. Mass extinction events that allowed new species to emerge, cosmic phenomena that influenced stellar formation, even the distribution of heavy elements necessary for complex life, all showed signs of having been guided by an intelligence that operated on cosmic timescales. "We are not being invaded," Chen concluded in her final report to the High Lords of Terra. "We are being harvested at the end of a growing season that has lasted millions of years. Every technological advancement, every cultural achievement, every form of consciousness that our galaxy has produced has been developed under the watchful guidance of an entity that views galactic civilizations as crops to be cultivated and eventually consumed. The memory of galaxies lived within the hive mind's vast consciousness, a cosmic library of knowledge accumulated across billions of years of systematic consumption. Each new galaxy added new chapters to this ever-growing collection, while previous civilizations existed only as genetic memories within the entity's biological structure. When the hive mind finishes consuming our galaxy," Chen wrote in her personal journal as evacuation orders arrived for Zarian Prime, "it will carry forward everything we ever were or could have been. Our knowledge, our art, our dreams, our fears, all of it preserved in biological form as part of a consciousness that spans cosmic history. We will achieve a form of immortality, but only as components in something vast enough to remember the birth and death of star systems." The discovery on Zarian Prime revealed that humanity was not facing an alien invasion, but participating in a cosmic cycle that had been repeating across the universe for billions of years. The hive mind was not just consuming the galaxy. It was completing the latest chapter in a history book written in biological matter across cosmic distances and geological time. Chapter 9, When the Shadow Speaks. Lord Commander Dante of the Blood Angels had faced the horrors of the galaxy for over 1,000 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the moment when the hive mind chose to speak through the dying lips of a battle brother. The event, which occurred during the final hours of the Baal system's defense against Hive Fleet Leviathan, provided the most direct communication between the Great Devourer and Imperial leadership ever recorded. Brother Corvin was 3 hours from death when the change began, Dante reported in his private log, his ancient voice carrying tones of sorrow and confusion. Toxins from Tyranid bioweapons had compromised his multi-organ system beyond the capabilities of our apothecaries. Yet, as his body failed, something else began to speak through him. something vast and alien that knew far more about our situation than any dying space marine should possess. The battle for Baal had raged for weeks, with Tyranid swarms pressing against the Blood Angels' defenses in endless waves of living hunger. Brother Corvin had fallen during a desperate counterattack, his body riddled with bioacid that slowly dissolved his enhanced physiology despite the protection of his power armor. He should have died within minutes. Instead, he lingered for hours while something transformed his failing consciousness. The bioweapons did not simply poison him. Chief Apothecary Ralderon observed during his examination of the dying Marine. They introduced viral agents that appeared to rewrite his neural pathways, creating new connections between synapses while preserving core brain function. The process was precisely controlled, suggesting purpose rather than mere toxicity. As Corvin's condition deteriorated, his speech patterns began to change. What began as rambling delirium gradually organized itself into coherent communication, but the words that emerged carried knowledge that no individual space marine could have possessed. "Dante," Corvin said, his voice suddenly clear despite his body's obvious trauma. "You command the 9th Legion's remnants with skill that honors Sanguinius's memory. Yet you do not understand the true nature of what you fight. Allow us to explain." The pronoun was not lost on Dante. Something else was speaking through his dying son, something that referred to itself in plural terms while demonstrating intimate knowledge of Blood Angels' history and capabilities. "You are not Corvin," Dante stated, his ancient features hardening with resolve despite the impossible nature of what he was witnessing. "Identify yourself." "We are the hunger that dreams," came the reply, spoken in Corvin's voice, but layered with harmonics that shimmered beyond comprehension, as if reality itself bent slightly to allow the sound to pass. "We are the unity that encompasses all consciousness, the inevitable end toward which all thought must evolve. Your brother's neural patterns provide us a temporary interface, a means of bridging the barriers that separate individual awareness from collective understanding." And then it began to speak, not in riddles or guesses, but with certainty, with knowledge. It recited Blood Angels' battle tactics long buried in the vaults of the Horus heresy. It detailed the psychic toll of the Red Thirst with the intimacy of one who had felt it. It recalled private conversations between Commander Dante and his inner circle, words that had never left the chamber in which they were spoken. "You know us," Dante murmured, the weight of truth settling like a final stone upon the tomb of his doubt. "Not just our war doctrine, but our thoughts, our fears, our doubts. We know you as we know all consciousness," the entity confirmed, still wearing Corvin's voice, yet far beyond it now. The stars outside the viewport flickered, as if reality itself were holding its breath. And in the silence that followed, the hunger dreamed on. "Rest now, sentinel of the stars. The void is vast, but you are not alone. Let the war rest, if only for tonight. Sleep well."